I never thought the only thing my grandfather would leave me was a piece of land the whole town had already written off. A shack with a sagging roof, a stretch of rocky ground no farmer would touch, and a cave so dark and bottomless folks swore it swallowed light itself. To me it felt less like an inheritance and more like a cruel reminder of everything I had already lost. But the moment my German Shepherd Atlas froze at that cave mouth, his ears sharp as blades, and Luna my husky let out a low, uneasy growl, I knew this place was hiding something no one else had dared to see. My name is Jonas Keene. I'm 48, a former ranger who came home with scars you can't always see. The army taught me how to survive, but nothing prepared me for burying my wife after her battle with cancer. The bills, the loneliness, the nights, too quiet, even with 2 loyal dogs at my side. It all wore me down like weather on stone. Atlas has the discipline of a soldier, always watching, always ready. Luna is the opposite, wild, intuitive, a flash of stubborn light in the darkness. Between the 3 of us, we've been surviving, not living, until that letter arrived and changed everything. Now, before I take you any deeper into this story, let me pause. If you're here listening to the footsteps of a man and 2 dogs standing at the edge of a mystery, I'd ask you to subscribe and share where you're watching from. Stories like this deserve company, and maybe yours needs to be told too. Because what I thought was a worthless cave was really the beginning of a dangerous truth, and stepping inside meant risking everything I had left. I stood there for a long time in front of that cave, Atlas stiff at my side, and Luna's silver blue eyes glowing in the half-light like little lanterns. The cold breath of the mountain pressed against my face, and for a moment it felt as though the cave itself was exhaling, as if it knew I had no choice but to step into whatever waited inside. But I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I turned back toward the shack, the weight of the letter still heavy in my pocket, and the heavier weight of memory pulling me down like an anchor. Inside the shack, the air was damp, but it wasn't any colder than the rented house I had been calling home for the past 3 years. That house was barely holding together, water stains blooming on the ceiling, a front porch step that creaked like it might snap any second, and a kitchen table with one leg shorter than the rest. It wasn't a home, it was a waiting room, the kind you sit in when the doctor is about to tell you something you already know but don't want to hear. Every night I would sit at that table, bills spread out like a deck of losing cards, my name stamped in red ink across envelopes I couldn't bear to open. Final notice. Past due. Termination of service. It didn't matter if I lined them up neatly or shoved them into a drawer, they shouted at me the same way. My military pension and disability check covered the basics, but not much more. I'd lived lean before deployed overseas with nothing but rations and sand in my teeth, but back then at least I had purpose. Back then I had Sarah waiting for me, her voice steadying me across 1,000 miles of static. Sarah. Even saying her name silently was like running a finger over a scar that would never smooth out. She was younger than me by 8 years, radiant, even on the worst of days, the kind of woman who could turn a shack into a home with nothing but her laugh. We fought her cancer together for 2 long years, spent every dime we had chasing hope from one clinic to another. When the insurance companies denied us again and again, I sold our house. When the treatments took what little strength she had left, I carried her to every appointment myself. And when she was gone, all I had left were 2 dogs who pressed their warm bodies against me at night as if they understood that without them I might not keep breathing. Atlas was hers originally. We got him when he was just a ball of dark fur and oversized paws. I trained him, but he bonded with her first. He'd rest his big square head on her lap whenever she came home from chemo patient, and protective, as if he knew she was fragile. Luna came later, a rescue from the shelter Sarah insisted on saving even when we could barely save ourselves. That husky was wild at first, chewing shoes, digging holes, howling like a wolf when the moon was full, but she made Sarah laugh. That laugh was medicine no doctor could prescribe. After Sarah passed, Atlas turned to me with soldier's loyalty. He followed every command, eyes sharp, posture rigid as though guarding me was now his mission. Luna refused to let grief turn me to stone. She shoved toys at my feet, barked until I threw the ball curled against me when nightmares yanked me out of sleep. Between the 2 of them, they kept me alive. Not living, just alive. So when that letter arrived, stamped with the law firm's seal, I almost didn't open it. I figured it was another creditor tracking me down. But when I read the words, when I realized my grandfather Arthur Keene had left me something anything, I laughed. Not a real laugh, one of those bitter, hollow things that echo in an empty room. A cave, a shack, that was his legacy. The old man had been eccentric, obsessed with maps and stories of buried history, but I never expected him to leave me the very obsession that had turned him into the town's ghost story. Still, when I folded that letter and put it back in the envelope, Atlas lifted his head from the floor and watched me. Luna wagged her tail like she knew some secret I didn't. And in that moment, I remembered what Sarah used to tell me whenever I came back from deployment. The map doesn't look like the journey, Jonas. You have to walk it to understand. It was easy to ignore the pull of the cave while I sat in the wreckage of my life, easier to drown in bills and memories than to believe in anything new. But every time I looked at Atlas's steady gaze or felt Luna's insistent nudge, I realized I was out of excuses. I wasn't afraid of dying in some hole in the ground. I was afraid of admitting that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for. The night before I drove out to the property, I sat at that wobbling kitchen table one last time. A single lamp lit the bills spread around me, and the faucet dripped its endless rhythm in the background. Atlas lay at my feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but ears still tuned to me. Luna sprawled across the worn rug, her chest rising and falling in steady, stubborn defiance of the silence. I pulled out Sarah's picture, her smile captured on a spring day long before sickness hollowed her cheeks. "I don't know what I'm doing, love," I whispered, my voice cracked, "but maybe you left me more than I realized." The next morning I loaded the truck. A beat-up canvas bag, some rations, a pair of flashlights, and the two dogs who had already saved me more times than I could count. The ride to West Virginia was quiet, the mountains rising like sentinels around us, the road winding through valleys that smelled of pine and rain. Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, every muscle taut, as if scanning for threats. Luna sprawled across the back seat, her nose pressed against the window, fogging the glass with her restless breath. I told myself the cave was worthless, just like everyone in town said. But a man doesn't bring both his dogs to a worthless place. Somewhere, deep down, I knew I was driving toward more than a shack in a hole in the ground. I was driving toward a reckoning with my grandfather's secrets, with my own grief, and with the chance that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't run out of reasons to keep living. And when the truck finally rattled to a stop at the edge of that overgrown dirt path, when Atlas leapt down with the precision of a soldier and Luna bounded after him with the untamed joy of a survivor, I realized something. I wasn't standing at the end of a road. I was standing at the beginning of a story I hadn't expected to live long enough to tell. When I stepped out of the truck that first morning and looked at the land my grandfather had left me, I felt more insult than gratitude. To anyone else, it was a wasteland, a slope of rocky soil where nothing grew, a lean-to shack that looked like it was propped up by stubbornness alone, and that cave yawning black and endless into the hillside. This was the inheritance Arthur Keene had passed down. After all the debts, after all the loss, this was supposed to mean something. I remember shaking my head, half laughing to myself. "Guess he wanted me to join him in being the town fool," I muttered. Atlas sniffed the ground, tail stiff alert as if this was a patrol. Luna darted toward the shack, her paws crunching dry leaves, and barked once sharp and impatient, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't moving. The shack door creaked when I pushed it open. The smell inside was a mix of mildew, tobacco, and old paper. I'd expected nothing but rot. But the first thing I noticed were the shelves lined with books so heavy the boards bowed under their weight. History tomes, military records, local geology, even thick binders labeled in my grandfather's tight scrawl. The table at the center was buried under rolled maps, a compass, notebooks stacked like bricks. It wasn't a home. It was a command post. For a moment, I stood there stunned. I'd grown up thinking Arthur was just an eccentric old miner who told stories about buried treasure to anyone who would listen. But looking at that room, I realized it hadn't been a hobby. It had been his life's mission. Still, my instinct was to scoff. All this for a cave no one cares about. I picked up one of the journals, flipped through page after page of numbers, coordinates, sketches of tunnels. Half the entries looked like gibberish, the ramblings of a man lost in obsession. My gut twisted with the same bitterness that had followed me for years. A man spends decades chasing ghosts and leaves his grandson a pile of useless scribbles. That was my inheritance. Atlas padded across the room, nose low, sniffing each corner like he expected trouble. Luna jumped onto the cot, shoved in the corner, and pawed at a faded quilt, her tail thumping dust into the air. I let them explore while I started stacking journals on the table, thinking maybe I'd burn them for firewood later. That's when I found the letter. It was tucked into the back of a leather-bound notebook folded, once yellowed with age. My grandfather's handwriting sprawled across the page, shakier than I remembered, but still strong. Jonas, if you are reading this, then the burden has passed to you. They will tell you this land is worthless. They always have. But history doesn't die just because men decide it's inconvenient. The truth is here hidden, and one day it must come to light. Trust the signs, trust the dogs, and above all, trust yourself. I sat down hard on the cot. My hands were trembling, though I told myself it was just from the cold. He'd written it to me. Not to my heir, not to whoever finds this. To me. I wanted to crumple the letter to laugh it off, but the words clung to me, especially that line about the dogs. Atlas had stopped pacing, his ears pointed toward the fireplace. Luna hopped down and joined him, both noses pressed to the soot-stained bricks. They whined in unison. "Not you too," I muttered, crouching beside them. But when I pressed my hand against one of the lower bricks, it shifted beneath my fingers. Loose. I worked it free, scraping stone against stone, until it slid out and landed on the floor with a dull thud. Behind it was a hollow space, dark and deep enough for my arm. My breath caught. Against every ounce of logic, I reached inside. My fingers brushed cold metal. I pulled out a tin box, heavier than it looked, its lid tight but not rusted. When it finally popped open, the contents nearly made me drop it. Inside lay a brass compass, old but still gleaming, the kind surveyors once used to chart unknown land. Beneath it, folded with impossible care, was a sheet of paper covered in symbols and numbers. A cipher, I realized. At the top, written in Arthur's hand, were 3 words: Ashford cipher, page 1. The air in the shack seemed to thicken. I glanced at Atlas, who sat like a statue, eyes locked on the box. Luna paced in a tight circle, whining under her breath. It was as if they both understood this wasn't junk. This was the first key. I leaned back against the wall, the letter still crumpled in my fist. My emotions spun like a storm. Part of me wanted to laugh again, of course. Arthur left behind puzzles. Of course it wasn't money or land anyone wanted, but some crazy code. Yet another part of me, deeper and harder to ignore, felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself in years: curiosity. I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling down journals, flipping pages, trying to find any reference to Ashford. The name popped up again and again: Colonel T. Ashford, Union Army, 1864. My grandfather had scribbled notes about hidden payroll, water tunnels, self-defending fortress. At first, it sounded like legend, the kind of gold fever story miners whispered over whiskey. But the cipher sheet in my hand told me Arthur hadn't just believed it. He had proof. As dusk fell, I lit the small stone fireplace. The flames licked the air, warming the shack, casting long shadows across the cluttered table. I stared at the compass, its needle quivering, as though alive. What was I supposed to do with this? A cave, a cipher, a map that might not even be real. My debts weren't going to vanish just because I found a story in the walls. And yet, when I held the compass, a strange calm came over me. Like the weight of it tethered me to something bigger than my grief. I thought of Sarah, of how she used to push me to look past the pain. The world doesn't end just because yours feels like it has, she'd said once. Maybe she was right. That night I lay on the cot, the dogs pressed close on either side, the box tucked under my jacket like a secret I couldn't let go. I tried to convince myself it was nonsense. That I'd pack up in the morning, drive home, sell the land for whatever scrap price I could get, and forget about the cave. But deep down I already knew the truth. The letter, the compass, the cipher, they weren't just relics of a dying man's obsession. They were an invitation, a call I couldn't ignore. And if Arthur Keene had trusted me to carry it, then maybe for the first time in a long while, I had no choice but to answer. The next morning the air outside was crisp, sharp enough to sting my lungs. Atlas was already standing at the shack door, tail, rigid, ears trained toward the cave like he'd been guarding it all night. Luna bounded past him the moment I unlatched the door, her paws kicking up frost from the ground, her breath puffing clouds into the mountain air. I tightened the straps on my canvas bag and slipped the compass into my jacket pocket. The cipher page was folded carefully in the notebook I carried under one arm. I still wasn't convinced any of this would lead to something real, but the weight of those objects was undeniable. They felt less like relics and more like a summons. All right, I muttered mostly to myself. Let's see what the old man was hiding. The cave mouth loomed larger as we approached. I'd seen it 100 times growing up, usually from a distance, always with the warning, "Don't go in there, boy. It'll swallow you whole." Standing before it now, with Atlas pacing at my side and Luna's pale eyes fixed on the darkness, I felt that warning settle into my bones. The beam of my flashlight cut through the entrance, but the light seemed to vanish just a few yards in, as though the cave drank it. I crouched, rubbed my hand across the rock, cold, damp, veined with mineral streaks that shimmered faintly. Water dripped in a steady rhythm, echoing against the cavern walls. We stepped inside. The air changed immediately, cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of limestone and something older, something untouched. Atlas moved ahead, steady but cautious, his nose twitching as he scanned the ground. Luna padded close behind me, tail low, her usual carefree bounce replaced with silence. I followed the chalk markings my grandfather had left, small symbols scrawled on the rock face every few yards. They were faint, faded by time, but still visible. He'd been down here more times than anyone realized. The tunnel sloped downward, the floor uneven, forcing me to slow my steps. My boots slipped on slick patches of clay. At one point, Atlas stopped, dead ears snapping upright. I froze with him, heart pounding. Luna let out a low whine. I aimed my flashlight forward and saw it, an old lantern perched on a stone shelf, rusted almost beyond recognition, a pile of ash beneath it. Nearby lay a tobacco pipe, its bowl cracked but unmistakably used. "He was here," I whispered, though the sound of my own voice made me flinch. My grandfather hadn't just studied this cave from his shack, he had lived in it, worked in it. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the dark became. My light skimmed over stalactites, dripping steadily into pools over jagged formations, rising like teeth from the floor. The sound of water amplified, filling the passage with its hollow roar. Every now and then a pebble tumbled from somewhere unseen, echoing so loudly it made my chest seize. Then Atlas growled. It wasn't his warning bark or his protective snarl. It was low, continuous, vibrating like distant thunder. His eyes fixed on the clay near the wall. I crouched beside him, shining the light where he stared, and my stomach turned to ice. Fresh boot prints, deep treads not mine, recent enough that the clay still held sharp edges. I rose slowly, scanning the shadows. My hand tightened on the flashlight until my knuckles ached. "We're not alone," I whispered. Atlas's body stiffened. Luna pressed against my leg, and for the first time since Sarah died, I felt that familiar combat edge, the sharpened senses, the steady breathing, the soldier's readiness. We pressed on, following my grandfather's crude map. The passage narrowed, then opened suddenly into a chamber. My light swept across it, revealing walls slick with moisture, a small mound of discarded tools, hammer, spade, pickaxe, rusted but recognizable. My grandfather had been digging here. And yet the chamber ended abruptly at a solid wall of stone, a dead end. I exhaled in frustration, the sound loud in the silence. "All this for nothing," I muttered. Atlas sniffed the wall, pacing back and forth. Luna pawed at the ground, her nose pressed against the rock. They weren't convinced. Kneeling, I pressed my palm flat to the stone. It was solid, cold. But then I felt it, a faint draft, a trickle of air cooler than the chamber itself. My pulse jumped. "Wait." I shifted, pressing my shoulder into the wall, pushing different sections. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding groan that made the dogs recoil, a slab of rock shifted inward, stone scraping against hidden stone. It wasn't a wall. It was a door. Dust rained from the ceiling as the slab pivoted open, revealing a black passage beyond, darker than anything we had passed. My flashlight beam barely pierced it. The air that flowed out was colder, metallic, carrying the faint tang of iron. Inside, carved into a niche in the stone, lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it free, my hands trembling as I unfolded it. The cloth revealed a map, not the rough sketches in Arthur's journals, but a surveyor's masterpiece, ink faded but precise. Lines of tunnels drawn with military accuracy annotations, marking hidden chambers, sluice gates, trap systems. At the bottom corner, in elegant script, a signature, Colt T. Ashford, 1864. I felt my knees weaken. This wasn't just obsession. This was history. My grandfather hadn't been chasing legends, he had found something real. Atlas sat, eyes locked on me, as if waiting for my next move. Luna nosed the edge of the map, then barked once, sharp and insistent. "Yeah," I whispered. "I know. We weren't looking at a worthless inheritance anymore. We were looking at a secret, hidden for more than a century. A secret people had walked into this mountain, to find and never returned. The silence pressed in, broken only by water dripping in the distance. Then another sound reached me, faint but undeniable, a metallic clang far off like something striking stone. Atlas's head whipped toward the noise. Luna growled softly. We weren't alone. I rolled the map, slid it into my pack, and stood pulse hammering. Whatever lay ahead was bigger than debts, bigger than grief. My grandfather had believed it was worth dying for. And now, with Atlas and Luna at my side, I had no choice but to find out why. The sound echoed again in the distance, metal on stone, deliberate this time. Atlas growled low in his throat, his hackles rising like a ridge of steel. Luna pressed against my leg, her icy eyes fixed on the dark passage beyond the hidden door. Every instinct I had from years of soldiering told me we weren't just hearing the ghosts of miners. Someone else was in the mountain. I backed us carefully out of the chamber, making sure the map was secured in my pack. Once we reached the shack, the evening light was fading into twilight shadows stretching long across the clearing. My truck sat where I'd left it, but beside it now idled a sleek black SUV. Its polished paint gleamed unnaturally against the mountain dirt. Atlas froze at the sight, body rigid. Luna's growl was sharper, more urgent. I felt my hand automatically drift toward my side, as if expecting to find a rifle slung there. Old habits die hard. The driver's door opened and out stepped a man who looked like he belonged more in a boardroom than at the edge of wilderness. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-50s. His hair was cut in a perfect salt and pepper style, his clothes expensive and spotless despite the dirt road. But his eyes, sharp, cold, scanning everything with disdain, gave him away. This wasn't a casual visit. Mr. Keene, he said, his voice smooth, practiced, carrying the weight of authority. I'm glad we found you. My name is Damian Blackthorne. I represent Blackthorne Industries. Atlas moved forward one step, planting himself between us, a growl rolling from his chest like thunder. Luna stood shoulder to shoulder with him, her lips curled, ears flat. I kept my voice steady. You've got business with me, not so much with you, he replied, smiling faintly, as with what you've inherited. His gaze flicked toward the cave mouth behind me, then back, calculating. We've been aware of the Keene property for some time. We know what lies beneath it. I forced a laugh I didn't feel. All that's down there is wet rock and bad stories. His smile widened, but it didn't touch his eyes. You've been inside. You wouldn't be standing here if you hadn't. And I'm sure by now you've realized this isn't just folklore. My company has the resources to handle such a discovery properly. You, Mr. Keene, do not. He took a step closer, and Atlas's growl deepened. I felt the vibration through the ground. I'll make this simple, Blackthorne continued, lowering his voice. We are prepared to offer you a substantial sum for exclusive rights to the property and anything recovered within. Enough to erase your debts. Enough to buy a new life. He named a number. It was obscene, more money than I'd ever imagined. Seeing enough to pay every bill to build a future I thought was lost forever. But in his tone, I heard the trap. I thought of Sarah, of the insurance denials, the clerical errors that had stolen precious time from us. I thought of my grandfather's warning in his letter, trust the signs, trust the dogs. Atlas barked, suddenly sharp and explosive. Luna lunged a step forward, forcing Blackthorne to halt. The SUV's rear doors opened then, and two men stepped out. Both were dressed in tactical gear boots, muddy eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses even in the fading light. Their hands rested near their weapons. Blackthorne glanced back at them, then returned his gaze to me, his mask of civility thinning. I'm trying to be reasonable, Mr. Keene. But you must understand, this is larger than you, larger than your family. If you refuse, you're not just standing in the way of progress, you're endangering yourself. Accidents happen in these mountains. Caves collapse. Men vanish. No one would blame the rock for claiming another fool. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his eyes. You've got the wrong man if you think I'll scare that easy. His smile vanished. The polished executive veneer slipped, and for a moment I saw the predator underneath. Think carefully, he said softly. You have nothing left. We're offering you everything. Don't mistake pride for survival. Atlas let out another guttural growl, his body like coiled steel. Luna's fur bristled, and she bared her teeth in a way I'd rarely seen. My hand rested on her back, steadying her as much as myself. I already survived worse than you, I told him. My voice came out like gravel, low and certain. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking of the SUV's engine. Then Blackthorn slipped a card from his pocket, set it on the hood of my truck. "My offer stands until it doesn't," he said, his tone ice. With a flick of his hand, his men slid back into the vehicle. Moments later, the SUV reversed, gravel spraying, and disappeared down the track, leaving a cloud of dust and menace in its wake. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Atlas finally relaxed, though his ears stayed high, scanning. Luna pressed her head against my leg, whining softly. I picked up the card, Blackthorn Industries, a phone number, a slogan that made my stomach twist, shaping the future by owning the past. I knew then this wasn't about treasure. It wasn't even about history. This was a war over truth, buried for generations. My grandfather hadn't died chasing a dream. He died standing in the way of people like Blackthorn, and now they were coming for me. That night I sat at the shack's table, lantern light flickering across the cipher and the map. Atlas lay near the door, ears twitching at every sound outside. Luna curled against my boots, restless, whining in her sleep. My hands traced the lines of the surveyor's map again and again, memorizing every curve of tunnel, every note scrawled in faded ink. I couldn't do this alone. A ranger learns one lesson above all else: when the fight comes, you don't go in solo. You call your brothers. So I reached for my phone, scrolling past the endless contacts I hadn't dialed in years, until I landed on the one name I trusted to stand in the fire with me. Rico Diaz, former demolition sergeant. My right hand, through too many battles. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice crackled through. "Jonas, damn, brother, it's been years." I closed my eyes, letting the sound steady me. "Yeah, and I wish I was calling for a drink, but I've got a problem, and I need backup." I could hear the grin in his voice, even across the miles. "Where and when?" As I gave him directions, the weight in my chest eased. Not because the danger was gone, far from it, but because for the first time since Sarah's death, I wasn't walking into the dark alone. Atlas lifted his head as if he understood. Luna's tail thumped once against the floor. The enemy had shown its face, and the line had been drawn. This wasn't about debts anymore. It wasn't about land or even treasure. It was about survival, about justice, about standing against men who thought they could buy and bury the truth. And as I looked at my two loyal dogs, as I heard Rico promise he'd be here by tomorrow, I felt the fire return. Blackthorn thought he'd found a broken man, guarding a worthless cave. What he didn't realize was that he'd awoken a soldier with nothing left to lose. And a soldier like that doesn't run. He fights. By the time Rico's dusty rental pulled into the clearing the next afternoon, I already knew we couldn't waste another hour. Blackthorn had shown his hand, and the sound of those metallic strikes deep inside the mountain still echoed in my mind. If his men were already drilling, every second counted. Rico stepped out, lean and restless, with that quick, assessing look I'd seen 100 times on missions overseas. Atlas trotted over, sniffed once, and gave him a soft whine of recognition. Luna bounded up after, tail wagging, as if she too remembered the man who'd patched us all together with equal parts humor and explosives. "Damn, brother," Rico said, gripping my hand tight. "You look like hell." I gave a humorless smile. "Hell's where we're headed. Come on inside." The shack turned into a command post. I spread Arthur's journals, the cipher page, and the surveyor's map across the table. Rico leaned over, his eyes darting, pen scratching as he connected the dots. "Jonas," he said finally, "this isn't just a map. It's a playbook. Your grandfather wasn't chasing stories, he was protecting evidence. Gold's one thing, but these notations? Sealed chambers, water systems, countermeasures? It's a fortress." Atlas shifted at the door, ears twitching. Luna paced in restless loops. The tension in the room was alive. We geared up with flashlights, ropes, and packs. At the cave entrance, Rico looked at me and grinned, that old wolfish grin. "Just like Kandahar, huh? Only wetter." Inside, the air shook faintly, the distant hum of drills now louder. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Blackthorn's men weren't waiting. They were tearing into the mountain. Guided by the cipher, we moved deeper, Atlas in front, Luna close behind. At the first fork, Rico studied the map, his finger tapping a faded notation. "This way. But careful, there's a floodgate trigger marked here." We eased forward. The floor sloped into ankle-deep water, murky and cold. Atlas suddenly froze, muscles rigid. Then, without warning, he yanked at my pant leg, dragging me back. I stumbled just as bubbles erupted where I'd been about to step. Beneath the water, a rusted pressure plate glimmered. One more step, and the whole passage might have collapsed. I pulled Atlas close, my voice hoarse. "You just saved me again, boy." His tail thumped once steady and sure. We pressed on until we reached the false wall Arthur had marked. Rico's hands worked the mechanism gears, grinding as stone pivoted inward. Beyond lay the heart of the mountain. A vaulted chamber stretched before us, dry and eerily preserved. Against one wall, wooden chests stacked neatly, gold glinting through broken slats. But what froze me were the shelves opposite, rows of sealed metal document cases, stamped with insignias of the Union Army. "Mother of God," Rico breathed. "This is it. Proof of everything." I stepped forward, running my hand over the cold steel of one case. The weight of history pressed down. These weren't just relics, they were evidence of betrayal, corruption, carried forward generations straight into Blackthorn's empire. But the moment of awe shattered with a thunderous explosion. The far wall cracked open, stone spraying as men poured through, weapons raised. Blackthorn himself stepped into the dust, his perfect suit torn, his face twisted with triumph. "Thank you, Mr. Keene," he sneered. "You did the hard work for me. Now, step aside." Rico cursed under his breath, reaching for the old levers marked on the wall. I darted to another set of controls, the ones Arthur had described in his final notes. "Hold them off," Rico shouted. Gunfire cracked, ricocheting off stone. Atlas lunged, knocking one armed man to the ground. Luna darted to my side, snarling, teeth flashing, as another attacker stumbled back. I found the lever heart hammering and pulled. The mountain groaned. Hidden gates slammed down, sealing off part of the chamber. Two of Blackthorn's men were cut off, their shouts muffled behind tons of rock. But Blackthorn remained, pistol-drawn, eyes blazing. "You think you can bury me like the past? This all belongs to me." Before I could answer, Atlas launched himself like a silver shadow, slamming into Blackthorn. The pistol clattered across the stone as Atlas pinned him, a growl rattling from deep in his chest. Luna stood beside him, teeth bared, her blue eyes cold as ice. Rico trained his light on the shelves of documents, his voice fierce. "Jonas, we've got what we need. The world will know. We end this now." I looked down at Blackthorn, struggling beneath Atlas's weight, his eyes no longer cold but frantic. For a moment I thought of Sarah, of the bills that had bled us dry, of the denials that stole her last chance. My grandfather's warning echoed in my ears. "This isn't your mountain," I told him, my voice steady. "It never was. It belongs to the truth." Atlas's growl deepened. Rico's hand tightened on the lever of another gate, and the chamber seemed to hold its breath. The fight wasn't over yet, but the door to justice had finally cracked open. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the shack that no longer sagged with age. The government had preserved it, now turning the land into a historic site. Students and journalists walked the trails my grandfather had once walked. Alone, their voices, carrying across the mountain like proof that his obsession hadn't been madness, it had been purpose. Atlas lay at my feet, head on his paws, his ears flicking every time someone came too close. Luna sprawled in the sun nearby, her coat shining, her tail thumping lazily whenever kids reached out to pet her. They weren't just dogs anymore. They were guardians of a story bigger than me, bigger than all of us. Blackthorn and his empire had fallen. The documents told the world what had been buried for over a century: the greed, the corruption, the stolen gold that had built fortunes on the backs of forgotten soldiers. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of debt or shame. I had paid off every last bill, and with Rico's help we started a foundation in Sarah's name. Families like ours would never face medical ruin alone again. That was my true inheritance. I ran a hand over Atlas's strong neck, then scratched behind Luna's ears as she leaned into me with a happy sigh. "We did it," I whispered, my voice breaking just enough to let the truth slip out. "We brought it all home." The wind rushed through the pines, carrying the smell of stone and earth, the same breath that had once rolled out of that cave like a warning. But it didn't feel like a threat anymore. It felt like peace, and for the first time I believed it would last.